Patryk Palczyński was born on June 3, 1985, in Gdynia. He was the only child of Julita and Bogusław. The family lived in the Tri-City. As a child, Patryk enjoyed the beauty of the nearby Baltic Sea. He spent a lot of time on yachts with his parents. At the age of 4, he took his first steps on a yacht. Julita and Bogusław divorced, but the teenager's love for the sea stood the test of time. Sailing turned out to be a passion with which he tied his future. After finishing high school, the teenager considered enrolling at the Gdynia Maritime Academy. However, the field of study he was interested in was not available. Therefore, Patryk decided that he would not study just for the sake of obtaining a diploma. He wanted to do what he loved. So, he began embarking on long international voyages. His first sea expedition lasted a year and a half. Then, Patryk decided to go on a Caribbean voyage. This time, he was away from home for 6 months. The young man's lifestyle was therefore very different from that of most people. His path was also different from that of most of his peers. However, Palczyński was not bothered by such work or the long separation from his loved ones. Moreover, he earned well for his age, and most importantly, he was doing something he was truly passionate about. Everything changed after Patryk returned from the picturesque Caribbean. According to his loved ones, he started behaving strangely. Most notably, he refused to talk about the voyage at all. This was unusual for him, as he had always eagerly shared stories from his sea expeditions before. He also spent most of his time on the computer, exchanging dozens of emails and text messages with someone. Whenever his mother, with whom the 24-year-old sailor lived, entered his room, he would either cover the screen or turn off the computer. It seemed like he didn't want her to see what he was doing online or who he was messaging. The woman found this behavior unsettling, but didn't press the issue, something she later regretted. On the other hand, Patryk was an adult, and if he was keeping a secret, he likely wouldn't have revealed it anyway. After some time, the young man began planning his next voyage. However, he didn't share many details with his family. It is known that he officially deregistered from his residence, as he had done before previous expeditions, and listed New Zealand as his new place of residence. It's worth noting that he was required to provide a destination, but due to the nature of his unusual work, he could only stay there for a short time. Patryk stated that he would return to Poland in 2012, though this was likely just an estimate. Finally, June 2, 2010, arrived the last day Patryk spent in the country. His mother had several concerns before his departure. First, he packed very few belongings for a journey to the other side of the world. Additionally, he took very little money with him, just a few dozen euros and $50. It was only after persistent persuasion that Patryk allowed his mother to accompany him to say goodbye at first. She wanted to drive him, but he refused. They parted ways shortly before midnight. June 3rd was supposed to be Patryk's birthday, so he and his mother celebrated briefly before his departure. At the time, she had no idea that these would be their last moments together. Days passed, and there was no sign of Patryk except for a single text message he sent shortly after his final meeting with his mother. In the message, he mentioned that he was turning off his phone. While being at sea limited his ability to communicate with loved ones, he had never gone silent for such a long period before. Concerned, Julita went to the police station a few days later. The police, however, dismissed the report of Patryk's disappearance. They suggested that he had run away from his mother because she was a toxic person. These words only made the worried woman feel even worse. Time passed, but nothing changed in the case of the missing young man. Determined to find answers, Julita decided to take matters into her own hands. She started by checking the computer her son had been using. To her surprise, she discovered that Patryk had created and regularly used multiple email accounts, more than a dozen in total. Even more unsettling was the fact that all emails from the past 3 years had been deleted. This strange discovery made her even more concerned. New questions arose, but there were no answers. A breakthrough in the case of Patryk's disappearance occurred on July 14th. That day, a boat discovered a strange object drifting about 7 kilometers from the port of Gdansk. As they approached, they realized it was most likely a human body. The police quickly arrived at the scene and launched an investigation. Detectives contacted Patryk's mother, as his disappearance was registered in the police database, and he had last been seen in the Tri-City area. Julita wasn't surprised by the call. She had already heard about the gruesome discovery in the media. Since no documents were found on the body and it was in an advanced state of decomposition, identifying the deceased was significantly challenging. When Patryk's mother saw the body, she recognized the clothes as those of her son. However, she couldn't definitively confirm or deny whether it was actually him. DNA tests were ordered to provide a conclusive answer. Despite the uncertainty, it seemed highly likely that the body belonged to Palczynski. Apart from confirming his identity, investigators also had to determine the cause of death. Evidence suggested the involvement of third parties. The body had 2 heavy 20-kilogram concrete slabs attached to it. Additionally, the deceased's hands were tied behind his back, similar to the case of Rebecca Zahau, making suicide highly unlikely. However, Patryk's mother noticed a detail that didn't fit. Around the deceased's neck was a necklace with a turtle pendant. Some sources claim it was an elephant. Julita and Patryk's friends insisted they had never seen him wear such an accessory. To this day, the owner and significance of the necklace remain unknown. About a month later, the DNA test results came back, confirming that the body recovered from the Baltic Sea was indeed Patryk's. While this wasn't a major surprise, investigators had considered other possibilities, such as someone else wearing the sailor's clothes. Authorities also examined the ropes used to tie the concrete slabs to the body. DNA traces were found belonging to one of the investigators who had likely failed to wear gloves, despite protocol, and 2 unidentified men who were not in any police databases. For Patryk's loved ones, it seemed obvious that he had been murdered. However, investigators ruled his death a suicide. His family strongly disagreed with this conclusion. How could Patryk have taken his own life in such an unusual manner, tying his own hands behind his back while carrying a massive weight? Furthermore, he had no known reason to end his life. Patryk's loved ones suspected that detectives found it easier to close the case rather than dedicate months of work to an investigation that might never yield answers. Numerous mistakes were made during the inquiry. One of the most significant was failing to analyze the bindings that restrained the sailor. Examining them could have determined whether the person who tied them had nautical experience. Despite Patryk's mother's request, investigators also refused to examine his watch and aviator model with multiple features useful for life at sea. This watch had a unique function. it stopped running when removed from the wrist. When found, it displayed the date, June 8th, suggesting that Patryk had not died immediately after disappearing, but had lived for several more days. This theory was further supported by an analysis of the watch's logins. For a few days following his disappearance, it had received signals near the Sea Towers building in Gdynia. This suggested that he had been kidnapped and held somewhere before his death. Additional support for this hypothesis came from the stomach examination, which revealed no food remnants. This indicated that Patryk had not eaten for at least 4 to 6 hours before dying, making it unlikely that he perished shortly after vanishing. Another puzzling detail was the discovery of some of Patryk's money in his pocket. Among the bills was a $20 note. However, his mother was certain that he had initially carried a $50 bill. This suggested that he had spent approximately $30. But where? Did he make a purchase in a foreign currency, or had he exchanged it at a currency exchange office? Surveillance footage from the Gdynia port area, where Patryk was last seen, might have shed light on his fate. However, the police requested access to late, and the recordings had already been erased. This was yet another oversight by investigators. The most plausible scenario is that his death was somehow connected to his Caribbean voyage or the planned journey that never happened. Patryk may have witnessed something he shouldn't have seen, perhaps drug smuggling or human trafficking. This would explain his strange behavior before leaving and the numerous emails and messages exchanged with an unknown correspondent or correspondence. He may have been blackmailed. This could also explain why his emails were deleted. They might have contained evidence of a crime he had witnessed. Those responsible for illegal activities may have decided not to take any risks and chose to silence him. While this remains just a theory, it is one that aligns with many unanswered questions surrounding his mysterious disappearance and death. It is also worth mentioning that Patryk's case did not receive much media attention, which could have helped solve the mystery. 3 days after the man's body was found, the media picked up a topic that, in fact, remains in the public eye to this day: the disappearance of Iwona Wieczorek. Palczynski's death is one of those cases that could have unfolded very differently. Another similar case is the disappearance of Sneha and Philip, who went missing just before the September 11th attacks. In the wake of that great tragedy, the police did not devote adequate attention to her case. On the other hand, it is understandable given the enormous amount of work they had to handle at that time. The cases of Iwona Wieczorek and Patryk Palczyński share at least a few similarities. Most notably, they both went missing around the same time and in the same general area. Additionally, the investigations into both cases were far from flawless. Unfortunately, to this day, neither of these two great criminal mysteries has been solved. Hopefully, one day, the truth about at least one of these cases will come to light. If you enjoyed this mystery, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more true crime stories, unsolved cases, and fascinating investigations. Stay curious, and see you in the next mystery.